Podcast.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and this week and next week, doing stories from the state of North Carolina. I know that this show has listeners all over the world. We're global, baby. Like, just all time, right? Like, obviously, North Carolina. Here's the thing. This show based in the Charlotte, North Carolina region, not even the location with the highest number of listens. For some reason, Garden Grove, California, which I got to imagine that is like a bot farm where they, it's just for podcast stats. It's in Orange County. Like, it's just a real random place, like kind of between, Anaheim and Long Beach. But I don't know, man. It's interesting. It's kind of like where Disneyland is. Although Disneyland's Anaheim. You get it. But like, I don't know. What's going on there? Who lives there? If you're listening in the Garden Grove area, why? And like a lot. Like, it's a ton of lists. Like, it's the most listens from anywhere else. But I don't know. Whatever. But then obviously Charlotte, like Los Angeles, up there, Houston, Columbus, Ohio, Chicago, Atlanta, Indianapolis, Philadelphia, Boardman, Oregon for some reason. Okay. Love it. Whatever. DeSoto, Texas, Ashburn, Virginia, North Bergen, New Jersey, Green Valley, Arizona, Sahuarita, Arizona. Okay, cool. Going down here, Tampere, Perkanma. That's bots. That's got to be bots. I don't even know where Perkanma is. I feel like I looked it up at one point and I still don't remember where it is. Oh, that's right. It's Finland. Okay, sure. Finland, checking in. Eagleshoven, Limburg, probably Germany. That feels like a Germany. Nailed it, I think. Netherlands, close enough. Sydney, Oslo, Frankfurt am Main, Hesse, that's Germany. Mannheim, Baden-Württemberg, also Germany. I've said some things about the Germans on this show, but like, again, just Mexico checking in, Singapore, all these places, right? Well, my whole point by going on that long, unnecessary tangent was that this show, based in North Carolina, I'm born and raised in North Carolina. We've done 2 other episodes on stories from North Carolina, episodes 206 and 247. But we're going to do 2 more weeks of stories from North Carolina. And we're starting this week with the stories of Munchkinland, the Little Rascals Daycare Center, the Loray Mill Strike, and our first one of the Coal Glen disaster.
Story time. Story time. Story time? Story time.
So the Deep River coal field out kind of between like Sanford, Pittsburgh, kind of obviously along the Deep River area, central North Carolina. It is the largest coal deposit in North Carolina. And up until I found this story, I had no idea that there was coal mining in North Carolina. Now, North Carolina has other mining. There's like phosphorus mining down on the coast. There's, gem mining, gold mining. North Carolina, home of the first gold rush. Ruby, sapphires, emeralds. I've mentioned that in previous episodes. So like mining in general does exist in North Carolina. I didn't realize coal mining was. I thought that was really like a West Virginia, Pennsylvania sort of thing. But no, Coal mining in North Carolina, local residents mined this field as early as the 1770s. Commercial excavation began in the 1850s when the first mine was dug near the community of Egypt, which was later renamed Cumnock for some ungodly reason in 1895. Why? Like, again, Egypt, very unoriginal, but Cumnock? What are we doing? Why is that a name of a place? Anyway, in 1921, the Carolina Coal Company began digging a mine near the village of Coal Glen, which is about 8 miles northwest of Sanford. This slope mine at Coal Glen was held up by hardwood boards that were 4 feet tall, which obviously forced miners to crawl through the mine to get where they needed to go. Because obviously, I mean, they're going to be, at least 5.5, 6 feet tall, right? Carts full of coal were then hauled up and down the main slope by a powered hoist, and mules were actually kept in an underground stable so that they could move the carts over to the hoist. After 2 years, the mine was producing 200 tons of coal per day. Now, I don't know. I'm not a coal mining expert. I don't know if 200 tons per day is like a good amount, but it seems like a lot, especially every day, but whatever. On May 26, 1925, a miner noticed that all of the rats in the mines were running away from the mine shaft. And that's probably a bad sign. Like, you're trained to look for things like that. The miners obviously relied on these rats, even though, they're rats, but they looked to them for signs of natural gas buildup or any other issues. And the men took this as a sign that there was an issue and actually walked off the site, leaving everyone. They didn't tell anybody. They just saw like this group of miners, this one miner, and he probably told his friends, like, oh, these rats are running away. We're just going to leave. And then just didn't tell anybody, I guess. Well, the next day at 9:30 a.m., the mine exploded. Everyone who was working underground died instantly. The blast was felt in the nearby Coal Glen village. Superintendent Howard Butler saw the smoke coming through a ventilation fan at the surface and took mechanic Joe Richardson down the main slope to investigate. Well, once they got down inside, they found 6 workers lying unconscious at a passage entrance and carried them back up to the surface. Superintendent Butler then ordered the mine's blast door to be closed while he and Richardson walked further into the mine. At 9:55 a.m., 25 minutes later after that initial explosion, the 2 men were 150 feet down into the mine when another explosion rang out, injuring Superintendent Butler. The 2 then crawled back to the surface just in time before a third explosion blasted through the mine, collapsing part of it and completely blocking the main entrance. Bureau of Mines investigators concluded that the explosions were caused by a blasting charge. As part of excavating the mine, 3 charges had been set, but 1 had failed to fully detonate. And so this partial charge had not collapsed the coal rock as it was intended, but instead scattered coal dust all through the mine, which then subsequently ignited from gas lanterns or whatever they were using to keep the area illuminated. At least 53 people died in the explosion, though the actual death toll has actually never been verified. The explosion was the deadliest industrial disaster in state history, and in response, the North Carolina General Assembly passed a workers' compensation law, and families of the deceased miners were awarded compensation through various relief funds. The Carolina Coal Company then went bankrupt in 1930, but the mine did reopen in 1943 and operated for 10 years, even connecting itself with the Egypt coal mine, which was kind of another coal mine, relatively large coal mine operating in that area, before the shaft was then flooded by the nearby Deep River. The mine today currently sits on private land owned by the General Timber Corporation. Moving on now to during World War I, the need for uniforms, tents, and other materials brought a ton of business to various textile mills in the state. And that still kind of a signature thing for a lot of the cities, kind of like along Interstate 85. Like once you start hitting like Greensboro, Winston-Salem, down to like Thomasville, High Point, Salisbury, Concord, where I live now, had a lot of textile stuff, Kannapolis, and even on down to Gaston County, where there was an abundant workforce of former sharecroppers. However, this textile boom did not last long, and the once high wages for mill workers disappeared, and the luxury items that they had purchased with credit began causing financial strain. So you had this big boom during World War II, needed all kinds of textiles, materials to be made and all that. And then that boom died quickly, except you had all these people working, they're making a ton of good money, and then they start buying stuff on credit, and then now they're not making any money anymore. And so now everybody's getting freaked out. So in response, mill owners introduced a stretch-out system that doubled the work for spinners and weavers while simultaneously reducing their wages. Brilliant. By the late 1920s, mill workers who once made $19 a week were now only making $5. Even more, attempts to reduce overhead costs turned the mills into dangerous environments that kept its workers, who were predominantly women, on the clock so long that they were actually unable to raise their children. So, one of these places, Loray Mill in Gastonia, conditions there got so bad that it caught the attention of Fred Irwin Beale, head of the Communist National Textile Workers Labor Union. Now, hang on. Just hang on. I said communist, and I felt everybody listening just kind of pucker their butthole a little bit and just let it go, man. Not everything related to communism is bad. There are a lot of bad things about communism, all right? But a lot of these labor unions had communist ideologies, and because of that, and we've discussed this in other episodes, a lot of that resulted in better working conditions. Oh, you like your 5-day work week? Thank the communists for that. Oh, you like an 8-hour work day, 5 days a week? Thank a communist. Oh, you like fair wages and safe working conditions? Thank a communist. So unpucker that butthole and let's finish the story. I don't know why I got so aggressive on that. On March 30th, 1929, the union held its first meeting in Gastonia, where workers were urged to take a stand against the owner of Loray Mill, and within hours, unanimously voted to go on strike. Now, as we have seen in other episodes, going on strike, not necessarily the best move. I think a lot of times people thought it was the only move they had, and a lot of times, most of the times, probably didn't end well. Well, guess what? Don't get too far ahead, but there's a reason why we're talking about this story. 2 days later, 1,800 mill workers walked out in protest, demanding the most insane things. All right, here's it. They wanted a 40-hour work week. Those lazy, good-for-nothing, entitled people want a 40-hour work week. They wanted $20 per week wages. Oh, greedy. And the removal of the stretch-out system. They don't see the vision, you guys. They don't see the vision. The vision of the stretch-out system was something, apparently, but they didn't get the vision. Anyway, in response to the strike, Loray Mill evicted families from the mill-owned homes because that's kind of like one thing that gets overlooked in a lot of these, where it's like you had these big mills, corporations, or whatever back in the day. They would own like a little village around the work site. A lot of mining companies did this too, where you just got free housing. Or maybe if it wasn't free, it was at a very, very reduced rate compared to what it now. Some companies took advantage of this. We've talked about this before in other stories, where they would issue their own currency, and the exchange rate on that currency was not fair at all. And so like a lot of this stuff could have been super advantageous for workers, but then the companies got greedy and they took advantage of it, and they like destroyed the system to where it became a detriment rather than a perk or a benefit. So seeing as strikes and things like this had never worked out well for anyone, Gastonia's mayor asked Governor O. Max Gardner for help and was given 250 National Guard troops to come in and keep the peace. However, tensions continued to rise, with each side taking, mostly verbal shots at each other. Nearly 100 masked men then destroyed the union's headquarters on April 18th, which forced the labor union to build a tent city outside of town with armed strikers posted up to protect it. Despite some workers deciding to return to the mill, the strike did continue. And on June 7th, 150 strikers marched to the mill to get the night shift workers who had gone back to then walk back out on the job. They were then met by sheriff's deputies who attacked the strikers and forced them to disperse. Police then went over to the tent city and demanded that the strikers turn over their weapons, which I don't think you can do that legally. When the strikers refused, a fight broke out that resulted in the death of Gastonia's police chief, Orville. Why can I not say this? Orville Aderholt. I think it's just weird vowel placement. Orville Aderholt. By the end of the night, 71 strikers were arrested, 16 of which were indicted for murder. During the trial, however, one juror was described as going insane after being presented with some piece of disturbing evidence. I don't know what it was, but it forced the judge to declare a mistrial. When news of the mistrial broke, residents who opposed the strikers formed a vigilante group called the Committee of 100 and began just running strikers out of the county altogether. On September 14th, armed vigilantes chased down a truck carrying 22 strikers and began firing at them. And during this gunfight, striker Ella Mae Wiggins was killed. Wiggins was a single mother of 9 children, though she had lost 4 of them up to this point to whooping cough. Remember whooping cough? Like, we still get it sometimes. I had a kid. I went to school with a kid who caught whooping cough. And it was the most insane thing because, he had to stay sequestered. They still let him come to school, which is crazy to me. But they, always kept him sequestered in, a room on the other side of the building. And it didn't matter because whenever he got into a coughing fit, you could still hear him just, and it just kept going. Oh my God, it was the loudest thing ever. And he would interrupt at the most awkward times. Like we would have a church service twice a week during our school because, Christian school. And it would always be at the most serious part of the sermon, and it'd be getting real quiet, and the preacher would be like, if anyone here feels led by the Lord to turn their life around. That was fun. That was a good time. I remember that. Anyway, this woman, she lost 4 kids to that because you can't breathe. I guess you just suffocate or run out of air. I don't know how you die from whooping cough, but it's bad. She lived in the African American neighborhood of Stumptown near Bessemer City. Anyway, she died. Wiggins was a vocal leader of the strike and actually used several original songs she had written as a way to rally the workers and keep up morale. One of her songs, Mill Mother's Lament, was later recorded by Pete Seeger. Although 5 mill workers were charged with Wiggins' murder, everyone was acquitted after less than 30 minutes of deliberation, even though more than 50 people were recorded as witnesses. Even more, during the retrial of Chief Aderholt's murder, 7 strikers were found guilty of second-degree murder and given lengthy prison sentences. So, clearly a heavy bias, right? No one gets charged in the murder of one of these outspoken people who supported the strikers, but then, 7 people were found guilty of murdering Gastonia's police chief and sent to prison. Fred Beale, leader of the strikers union and one of the men who was convicted in Aderholt's murder, actually fled to the Soviet Union with another union organizer to avoid his prison sentence. And then, after realizing that life in the Soviet Union wasn't actually any better, he returned to North Carolina and actually surrendered to authorities. It's hey man, I'd rather be in an American prison than free in Russia. And that should tell you a lot. Following both trials, the strike then fizzled out, and by comparison to other strikes at the time, the Loray Mill Strike was seen as a failure, though progress was made due to successes in other strikes around the house or around the South to have better working conditions. Moving on now, so still kind of following the Civil War, textile industry still a big deal in North Carolina. In 1880. James and William Holt built the Glen Coal Mill and Village near Burlington by the Haw River. At its height, this village was home to roughly 250 people and consisted of a school and a company store. However, as competition increased, other textile companies were moving in. The need for company towns like Glencoe decreased, and the village shut down in 1954. Practically all of the families that lived in this village moved out, except for one. Now, stories began circulating around the nearby town of Burlington that this ornery family of little people still lived in the village, which quickly became known as Munchkinland. And and this family, alleged family of little people, did not take too kindly to others coming through and gawking at them. Some accounts claim that they would throw things at cars. Others who stopped to look at the houses would be chased by the family or have their car shaken back and forth. On days when they were especially angry, people reported being shot at. No one actually knew where the quote-unquote munchkins came from. Their words, not mine. I know that's not PC, but it's what they used. Though some claimed that they lived on a nearby island on the Haw River, while others claimed that they had taken over the abandoned houses in the old village. So now it quickly turned in from like one family of little people to just like this whole mini invasion. They just sprung up out of this island or somewhere, wherever they came from. And now they just took over this old mill village. In 1999, families returned to the old village to restore the older homes and start gentrifying it or whatever. One day, new resident Ann Hobgood heard a knock on her door. When she opened it, she was greeted by Garland Massey, a 4'8" man who quickly befriended Hobgood and eventually told her the true story of Munchkinland. So, Massey explained that his family had grown up in the neighborhood and that two of his siblings had been born with what was called brittle bone disease. Now, while that's not exactly dwarfism, the condition did confine Massey's siblings to wheelchairs, which then obviously left them somewhat deformed and probably unable to grow to regular size, I guess. Even worse, Massey's parents actually instructed him to place his two wheelchair-ridden siblings on the front porch every day while he was at school and his parents were at work. And that's like, honestly though, it's not that shocking. It's like it's the 40s and 50s. What else were they going to do? The parents had to go work at the mill. They couldn't afford a babysitter, probably because everyone else that could have watched their kids was working at the mill. Garland, he's tiny, but at least he's functional. He has to go to school, so just leave him out on the front porch all day. Because what are they going to do? They can't go back inside. And then if they try to roll off the front porch, they're going to get hurt because it's not like they got a ramp. They probably don't have a ramp. And so these poor kids for hours every day would just sit on the porch unattended while passersby would stop and gawk at their deformed little bodies. Oh, man. When Massey eventually learned about the ridicule, he began arming his siblings with rocks and other objects to hurl at the people taunting them. And from there, that's how the legend of Munchkinland was born. And I don't even know what's worse. Just a cavalry of angry little people who took over an abandoned mill village, or two physically handicapped kids who were forced to sit on the porch all day, and they just started throwing rocks at people who would stop, and maybe some of them were actually with good intentions, checking on them, hey, you kids all right? And then it's stop looking at us, old man, and they just hurl rocks. Anyway, You can visit Munchkinland, or what's part of it, which is part of the Glencoe Mill and his Village Historic District, just north of Burlington, off of Highway 62. I don't know that you'll see anybody, but that's what it was. Our final story here, going to January of 1989, when Bob Kelly was accused of abusing a boy at Little Rascals Daycare Center in Edenton. Edenton being towards the Outer Banks, just kind of in that desolate area where it's just flat and marshy and there's not a lot going on. Bob, who was a part-time plumber / professional golfer, crazy, he often helped out at the daycare, which was run by his wife, Betsy. Edenton Police and the Department of Social Services investigated the allegations, and within a month, 3 more children made similar accusations. Bob was arrested in April and charged with child abuse. Meanwhile, police told the other parents at the daycare to have their children assessed for abuse. Several more children then were brought to police and repeatedly questioned, and after 10 more months, 90 different children made claims of abuse that had occurred between September and December of 1988 against not just Bob, but dozens of different people all over Edenton. In all, 7 people, along with Bob, were arrested. They were his wife, Betsy, Dawn Wilson, the daycare's cook, Robin Byram, a teacher at the daycare, Shelley Stone, another teacher at the daycare, Darlene Harris, manager of the local Head Start program, and Scott Privet, the son of a local judge and owner of a video store. The trial was moved nearly 80 miles to Farmville because prosecutors couldn't find an unbiased jury in Edenton. Even more, PBS Frontline picked up the story and broadcast the documentary Innocence Lost, but in the documentary, they suggested that the abuse being alleged could not possibly have happened to all of these kids. In total, there were 248 charges, 100 of which were against Bob Kelly. And over the next 9 months, Bob listened to 12 different children provide their testimony of the alleged abuse, which included ritualistic killing of babies, children being taken out on boats and thrown overboard to drown or be eaten by a school of sharks, and sexual assaults while riding a hot air balloon. Now, despite zero record of any child enrolled at the daycare ever dying, Bob was convicted on 99 of 100 counts of rape and other crimes against children, and was, at the time, the most expensive trial in the state's history. He was sentenced to 12 consecutive life terms in prison. Dawn Wilson, the daycare's cook, who refused to believe that any of this was legitimate, chose to go on trial and was sentenced to life in prison. Bob's wife, Betsy, who actually spent 2 years in prison waiting for her trial, accepted a no contest plea and was given a 7-year sentence. However, she was released after only serving 1 more year in prison. Following Betsy's release in 1995, the North Carolina Court of Appeals reversed Bob and Dawn's convictions and just dismissed all of the charges altogether, citing errors by the prosecution. You think? Robin Byram being one of the other teachers at the daycare, she also spent a year in prison waiting her trial. Scott Privet, the owner of the video store who had nothing to do with this daycare, he spent 3 years in jail waiting trial, then had his bond reduced from $1 million to $500,000 and was released. This entire ordeal was part of this broader satanic panic that occurred in the 1980s. We talked about probably the most famous case as part of this, the McMartin preschool trial in California back on episode 155. But a lot of other daycares around the country were experiencing this same thing, where they would be accused of practicing Satanism and committing acts of sexual abuse against children. And it was all done. It was all I don't know, these bloodthirsty prosecutors would just take these children, interrogate them, and coerce them into basically coming up with these insane stories. And I don't understand. There's, especially in this case, where these kids, and again, this is like daycare, so these are probably like 3 or 4 year olds. They're saying, prosecutors are saying that these kids reported ritualistic killings or being taken out on boats and thrown overboard to be eaten by a school of sharks, or to be like raped on a hot air balloon. And like all 3 of those things are so easily verifiable because you can just either A, look around at the daycare's records and look at their enrollment records and see if any kids had died. Also, Edenton's a really small town, like hundreds of people, small town. You can easily just look at any death record or just ask any family, hey, has your baby died recently? No? Interesting. Why would this kid say that all of these other kids have been murdered or eaten by sharks? The other thing, hey, have you seen any hot air balloons? Where's the nearest hot air balloon? I don't even know. But I get, that's not just like a small thing. Somebody would have seen hot air balloons flying around at time. But no, prosecutors were like, yep, this definitely all happened. They then took it, and none of the evidence, by the way, took it to a jury. And the jury was like, yeah, this is all very believable. Oh, Satan was involved? Well, that explains everything. Because Satan can just trick us all. He's the great deceiver, and we can just, so we're going to, these daycare people, they're Satanists, and we're going to put them away forever. God, what an idiot. In the years following the case, children did come clean about why they had accused Bob and Betsy Kelly of all of this abuse, with one child stating that he was angry at Bob because he wasn't allowed to put ketchup on his peanut butter sandwich. And I get it. Like, I think Bob was right in that instance. That's disgusting. Like, ketchup on a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? What's wrong with you? And of course, this little dork who wants to put ketchup on his peanut butter and jelly sandwich would then also say something like, "Get Bob raped me on a hot air balloon." Like, oh God. In the years following the case, prosecutor Nancy Lamb indicted Bob on new sexual assault charges that were allegedly completely unrelated, but they were definitely related. Those charges were eventually dropped in 1999. Bob eventually moved out to Sanford, where he took up gardening and volunteering with local inmates because his life had been ruined by these dumb little kids.
All done.
There we go. Part 3 of Stories from North Carolina in the books. You can find all of these stories as well as the ones next week in the second edition of my 100 Stories from 100 Counties, Lesser Known History of North Carolina. Go to johnhensonwrites.com for that, more information on that. But let us recap here and see what we learned today. What did we learn? Number 1, North Carolina had coal mining. Never knew. Well, it doesn't have any anymore because the mines exploded and they all got flooded out by the rivers. Number 2, Munchkinland. Kind of a real place with angry, not necessarily little people, but physically disabled ones who threw rocks at cars. Probably because they were forced to sit out on the porch all day. And probably in the sun. Like, not even just in the summer, but also in the winter when it's super cold. Like, that's crazy. Like, terrible parenting, but also I don't know what other choice they had. Number 3. Listen, it's PSA to parents. And, like, I have kids who are in daycare age. If either of them came to me and was like, "Dad, the teacher at my daycare, they flushed us down the toilet, and then they kill us with Satan," I'm going to immediately go to his mother and be like, "Babe, you got to stop watching all of these horror shows and serial killer documentaries in front of the kids. Because that's where and again, I don't know where these kids got this stuff from in the 80s, but like, I hope as a parent, I would have enough critical thinking abilities to just be like, hey, whatever you're saying, buddy, is your imagination and not true. And so, that's that. Parents, don't be stupid. All right, let's try to have some critical thinking and not destroy lives of relatively innocent people. Okay, thanks.
What did we learn?
Next week on Our Weird World, like I mentioned, staying in North Carolina, part 4, got 5 stories this time. We're looking at the stories of Topsy the elephant, a different one, a less famous Topsy the elephant. Obviously, the most famous one being the one that Thomas Edison electrocuted to death. So it's not going to be that extreme. But there was another Topsy the elephant that caused some ruckus in North Carolina. We'll look at that story. Also, the lives of Gerald Heggie, Richard McCoy Jr., Dwight Watson, and Jacqueline Lucas. So come on back for that next week. Thank you so much for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird.
This is a podcast